Most women today consider shaving a routine part of hygiene, but that belief wasn't natural. It was sold to them. In 1915, Gillette didn't just market razors. It invented a need where none existed. In this episode, we uncover how a single campaign reshaped generations of women's self-image, grooming, and even fashion. You'll see the original ads, understand the cultural shifts behind them, and learn how one company didn't just sell razors, it redefined femininity. This is the untold story of how marketing changed bodies and beauty forever. At the start of the 20th century, personal grooming looked very different from what we know today. For women, hygiene meant staying clean, not hairless. There were no cultural norms around removing body hair. In fact, most women likely never gave it a second thought. Shaving underarms or legs simply wasn't part of daily life. The idea of bare skin as more beautiful hadn't taken root yet. In a time when even bathing regularly was a luxury in many households, the focus was on health, not aesthetics. Beauty routines existed, but they centered on modesty, not exposure. It wasn't that women rejected shaving, it's that it hadn't even occurred to them. In the early 1900s, femininity was defined by modesty. Victorian and Edwardian fashion dictated long sleeves, high collars, and floor-length skirts. Most of a woman's body was concealed, and that concealment shaped what was expected and what wasn't. Because skin wasn't on display, body hair never entered the cultural conversation. Advertising didn't mention it, etiquette books didn't address it, and no woman looked in the mirror and saw her leg hair as a problem to solve. The very idea of feminine grooming didn't include the razor. Hair removal simply wasn't part of the feminine identity. That would change, but not because of women's preferences. It would change because someone decided it could. In 1901, King Camp Gillette patented a new kind of razor, a safety razor that used disposable blades. His invention transformed men's grooming, offering a safer, faster alternative to the straight razor. By the 1910s, Gillette was a household name, especially after securing military contracts to supply razors to U.S. soldiers during World War I. But the company faced a problem. The male market was nearing saturation. Most men already had razors. Growth had to come from somewhere else. And that's when the company turned its eyes toward a largely untouched demographic, women. Not because women wanted razors, but because the company needed them to. Around the same time, women's fashion began to evolve. Sleeveless dresses entered evening wear. Hemlines started rising, and for the first time, certain parts of a woman's body, underarms, legs, became visible in public. But visibility doesn't automatically create discomfort. At first, bare arms were simply that, bare. The exposed skin didn't come with any expectation to look a certain way. There was no widespread commentary on body hair, no whispers of what was acceptable. Still, for marketers, this shift was a signal. Visibility opened the door. All they needed was a message persuasive enough to walk through it. That message was coming, and it would change everything. Even as fashion changed, there was no real social pressure for women to remove body hair. Magazines, etiquette guides, and even beauty columns made little to no mention of it. There were no razors designed for women, no creams, no tools, and no public demand. Hair removal was a niche practice, often tied to medical or theatrical needs. It wasn't a topic of casual conversation, let alone a shared expectation. Most women simply didn't consider underarm or leg hair something to be managed. It wasn't seen as unhygienic, and it certainly wasn't considered unfeminine. That silence was precisely what Gillette saw, and what they chose to disrupt. Gillette didn't wait for demand, they created it. In the exposed shoulders of evening gowns, the company saw an opening, not a crisis of beauty, but a chance to invent one. If visibility was increasing, why not suggest that visible hair was a problem? The logic was simple. Show the hair, label it undesirable, offer a solution. And with fashion trends doing half the work, Gillette had the perfect cultural moment. They weren't meeting a need, they were defining it. What followed would be one of the most successful and enduring examples of marketing manufacturing desire. In 1915, Gillette launched the Milady Décolleté, the first safety razor designed specifically for women. It wasn't just a functional tool, it was marketed as an elegant accessory, made to fit a woman's hand, her vanity, her image. The name itself, French for low neckline, hinted at the kind of exposure women were beginning to navigate. Gillette wasn't just selling a product, it was offering a new form of femininity, one that aligned with changing fashion but also subtly redefined what it meant to be clean, modern, and attractive. With the Milady, Gillette planted the idea that a woman's body had a new problem, and that only their razor could solve it. The first ads appeared in Harper's Bazaar in May 1915. They were unlike anything women had seen before. Rather than focus on functionality, the ads used emotional triggers, words like embarrassment and unsightly, to describe underarm hair. The message was clear. This wasn't about hygiene. It was about social fear. What if someone saw? What if it ruined the impression you made? These campaigns didn't reflect existing concerns. They created them. They told women they had a problem, and conveniently they were also the solution. A new beauty standard had just been born, not from culture, but from commerce. Gillette's first real weapon wasn't the razor, it was emotion. In their 1915 campaign, they targeted a part of the body that had never been politicized, the underarm. Early ads didn't just suggest that body hair was undesirable. They framed it as embarrassing. Words like unattractive, unsightly, and even unhygienic began appearing in women's magazines, turning something previously invisible into a source of shame. But it wasn't just about fear. These ads paired shame with aspiration. To shave wasn't just to remove hair, it was to become modern, refined, graceful. A simple act was now linked to beauty, progress, and belonging. It was a 1-2 punch. First, create the problem. Then, sell the solution. Not just as grooming, but as identity. In the 1910s and 1920s, fashion became a silent accomplice in Gillette's campaign. As sleeveless dresses entered evening wear and public dancing grew in popularity, women's arms, and later, legs, were suddenly more visible than ever. But visibility alone doesn't create discomfort. It took marketing to fill in that gap. Gillette ads framed the new fashion not as freedom, but as risk. If you wore these dresses, they implied, you needed to look a certain way underneath them. Shaving became a quiet but urgent necessity, not for health, but for social survival. Fashion had opened a door, and Gillette stepped through it, turning bare skin into a billboard for their message. They didn't just follow trends, they bent them to serve a product. By the early 1920s, the strategy was working and expanding. The Roaring Twenties brought rising hemlines, shorter skirts, and the popularization of stockings. Suddenly, legs, like underarms, were on display. Gillette saw the opportunity immediately. Ads began targeting not just the arms but the legs as well, suggesting that leg hair was equally offensive, equally in need of removal. The logic from earlier campaigns simply extended downward, and as women embraced the freedom of dance halls, flapper fashion, and new public roles, they also absorbed a new grooming routine. Within just a few years, what had once been unthinkable, shaving one's legs, became quietly expected. A new habit was born, one that hadn't come from women, but from above. The rise of women's magazines helped solidify Gillette's narrative. Publications like Harper's Bazaar, Ladies' Home Journal, and McCall's began running razor ads alongside editorial content. The distinction between journalism and marketing grew fuzzy. Beauty advice columns started echoing the language of the ads, promoting the idea that smooth skin was cleaner, more elegant, more feminine. Articles positioned hair removal as common sense, not corporate strategy. And because these magazines were seen as trusted sources, the messaging felt natural, even friendly. It wasn't a product push, it was lifestyle guidance. In reality, the media wasn't just reflecting culture, it was shaping it in lockstep with the brands funding its pages. And with every issue, the myth of natural shaving grew stronger. As the marketing spread, so did the vocabulary. Words like smooth, dainty, refined, and well-groomed became common shorthand for what it meant to be feminine. But these weren't just style descriptors. They carried moral and class undertones. Smoothness became associated with discipline, with being well-kept, with rising above the unclean or unkempt. In contrast, natural hair began to suggest carelessness, even vulgarity. The language wasn't neutral. It reinforced a worldview where grooming wasn't just personal. It was a sign of status and self-worth. What started as a marketing pitch had quietly become a social expectation. By the 1930s, shaving wasn't a choice. It was a standard. And the words used to describe it made sure no one forgot why. Gillette may have started the conversation, but it didn't stay a solo act for long. Once the company proved that body hair could be turned into a profitable problem, other brands raced to get a piece of the new market. Schick entered with their own women's razors, while hair removal creams like Veet began offering alternatives to shaving. But the competition didn't challenge the premise. They doubled down on it. Every product, every ad reinforced the same equation. Visible hair equals unattractive, unacceptable, unfeminine. The market expanded, but the message stayed identical. With more voices saying the same thing, the idea that women should be hairless began to feel less like a pitch and more like truth. By the 1940s, the conversation had shifted completely. Pin-up posters, military culture, and wartime fashion all played their part. With nylon stockings in short supply during World War II, many women went bare-legged in public, and that visibility came with an expectation. Shaved legs were no longer trendy or aspirational, they were standard. Magazines framed hair removal as hygiene, not beauty, a daily habit like brushing your teeth. And in the era of Rosie the Riveter, even working women were encouraged to maintain a feminine appearance that included smooth skin. What had begun as a marketing experiment was now embedded in the culture. Hairlessness had been normalized, and resistance quietly erased. Once the habit was set, it stopped feeling like a choice. By the 1950s and beyond, generations of girls grew up seeing razors and hair removal as simply part of being a woman. They didn't need convincing. The ads were already part of the background. Magazines, movies, and even school health guides echoed the same message. Shaving became something automatic, something inherited, something never questioned. And because each new generation saw it modeled by the one before, the original source, the ad campaign, faded from memory. It didn't feel like marketing anymore. It felt like common sense. That's how you know a product has succeeded, when it becomes invisible. What began as a way to sell razors eventually rewired how society defined femininity. Hairlessness wasn't just promoted as fashionable, it was framed as moral. Smooth skin meant cleanliness. Body hair, by contrast, became a symbol of laziness, defiance, or even shame. These messages weren't just public, they were personal. Mothers passed them down to daughters. Friends policed each other. The beauty industry kept pace, launching newer, faster, more expensive ways to fix what had never been broken. And in the process, a marketing decision made in 1915 became something much deeper, a quiet form of cultural control, one that still shapes how women see themselves over a century later. What began as a marketing tactic is now a global industry worth billions. Today, the hair removal market includes razors, waxing kits, depilatory creams, threading salons, and laser treatments, all solving a problem that was invented in 1915. This isn't just about products. It's about profit built on an idea that women's bodies must be altered to be acceptable. The more invasive or expensive the method, the more it's celebrated as advanced, and the more revenue it generates. Behind every smooth leg is a supply chain, a pricing model, a corporate strategy. Beauty norms aren't just cultural, they're economic. They're maintained because they're lucrative. And the original invention? Still paying dividends. What started in the US didn't stay there. As American media, fashion, and consumer brands expanded their reach, the Western idea of feminine grooming went global. In countries with no history of shaving, where body hair was unremarkable, new ads, products, and celebrity endorsements began to shift expectations. Shaving became a symbol of being modern, educated, or civilized. And as Western beauty standards infiltrated films, television, and magazines, the local norms began to fade. It wasn't framed as cultural erosion, it was branded as progress. But behind the gloss of global beauty was the same old formula: define the flaw, sell the fix, repeat. Today, most women will tell you they shave because they want to. It feels like a choice, personal, simple, maybe even empowering. But that sense of autonomy was shaped by a century of messaging. When every ad, every image, every role model reinforces one look, it doesn't feel like pressure. It just feels like reality. That's the power of normalization. It hides its own origins. What was once sold as a brand new behavior is now so entrenched, we forget it was ever marketed. So the question isn't whether shaving is wrong. The question is, would we still do it if no one had ever told us we should? By the late 1960s, second-wave feminists began to challenge beauty standards, and body hair became a visible battleground. Refusing to shave wasn't just about comfort, it was political. Women grew out leg and underarm hair as a rejection of patriarchal expectations, but even as some pushed back, the pressure to conform didn't disappear. In fact, it intensified, especially in mainstream media. The feminist protest was labeled extreme, while the clean-shaven look was repackaged as neutral, respectable, even necessary. And today, the backlash still echoes, but so does the expectation. Cultural memory is short, but the razor is forever. Modern ads don't sell shame the way they used to. Now, it's all about empowerment, self-love, and treating yourself. Shaving is framed as a ritual, a choice, an act of care, never a duty. You're not doing it for others, they say. You're doing it for you. But pause for a moment. Who defined what you is supposed to want? When every definition of beauty includes hairlessness, when smoothness equals desirability in every direction you look, is it really a free decision? Or just a better packaged version of the same message? Today's language may feel kinder, but the logic remains unchanged. The product still sells the problem. By the early 2000s, a familiar script started playing out again. But this time, the target was men. Suddenly, male hair removal was rebranded from niche to normal. Magazine spreads, gym locker rooms, and dating apps all reflected the shift. Ads pushed the idea of a clean look, chest, back, even arms and eyebrows. New razors and grooming tools hit the shelves, tailored specifically to male consumers. The message? Hairless meant athletic, attractive, and modern. Sound familiar? It was the same marketing playbook used on women for decades. The only difference was the packaging. Once again, it wasn't demand driving the market. In recent years, a visible shift has begun. Influencers, celebrities, and everyday women are rejecting the pressure to shave, posting unfiltered photos that challenge decades of advertising. What once would have been hidden is now shared with pride, not for shock, but for visibility. This isn't just a trend, it's a cultural recalibration. Conversations around body autonomy, gender norms, and the commodification of appearance are reshaping the dialogue. For some, not shaving is a political act. For others, it's simply comfort. But for all, it's a reminder that these standards were made, and anything made can be questioned, challenged, or undone. When Gillette launched its women's razor campaign in 1915, it wasn't responding to consumer demand. It was inventing one. There was no groundswell of women desperate to remove body hair. There was just a product, a new opportunity, and a cultural shift ready to be shaped. That's what makes this story so revealing. It's not just about beauty, it's about influence. Gillette's campaign is now a textbook case in how marketing can create behaviors, beliefs, even entire identities, simply by repeating a message long enough, loud enough, and everywhere. They didn't meet a need, they made a norm. Ask most people today why they shave, and the answer will probably be hygiene. It sounds neutral, scientific, sensible, but where did that belief come from? There's no medical basis for hair removal as cleaner or healthier. It's not hygiene, it's history. And once we see that, it becomes clear. The story of shaving is also a story of belief. Not just what we believe about ourselves, but what we've been taught to believe about gender, beauty, desirability, and worth. These aren't shallow concerns, they shape daily life, which means they're worth examining. We tend to think our routines are personal, the way we dress, how we look, what we do with our bodies. But the story of shaving reminds us that personal choices often begin with powerful suggestions. Somewhere, someone defined what was normal, clean, or beautiful, and then sold it back to us. That's not just marketing. That's influence at its deepest level. When we realize how these beliefs were built, we gain the freedom to unbuild them. To ask, honestly, is this something I want, or just something I inherited? And that shift, even in something as small as a razor, is where real autonomy begins. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you a new perspective on something as everyday as shaving, consider subscribing. We make videos that dig into the hidden histories behind the choices we think are just normal. It helps more than you think. And if this episode made you pause, hit the like button, or better yet, join the conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you remember when, or why, you first started shaving? And if no one had ever told you it was normal, would you still do it? Let's talk about it. Because the more we understand how these stories are shaped, the more we get to shape our own.